Hello everyone, I hope you're all well as we enter our 9th week in lockdown. This short presentation is designed to take you through the principles and methodology we'll be using as a school regarding centre assessed grading. It covers the work that's been completed over the last couple of weeks, as well as what needs to be completed next week, the week commencing the 18th of May. Towards the end of March, the government announced that the exams for this summer would be cancelled, and that it was their intention that results would be issued to this year's cohort based on a range of evidence and data, and this included performance in mock exams and non-exam assessments. The change in examination arrangements for this year places significant responsibility on all of us to get the process right for our students. Our approach to centre-assessed gradings is underpinned by the following principles. The term centre-assessed grades, rather than calculated grade, predicted grade, or teacher-assessed grade, will be used because it correctly focuses the responsibility of the centre rather than the individual teacher. Our work together will generate the centre-assessed grades, not individual teachers, not individual heads of department, not line managers. We will do this as a team. All judgments made must be objective and fair. The process must be transparent, and all individual decisions should be documented. As a school, we must be able to support judgments with evidence that already exists. All subject areas must use the same process to determine the centre-assessed grades. And the process must be transparent and able to withstand scrutiny, so this means we need to document our process should there be any appeals in the summer term. We anticipate that outcomes in 2020 will be broadly in line with previous cohorts. Ofqual use a methodology called comparable outcomes. One of the best ways to describe this is that all things being equal, we should expect GCSE results to be broadly similar year on year based on prior attainment at Key Stage 2. Analysis of our 2020 cohort based on prior attainment at Key Stage 2 shows that they are very similar in terms of ability profile to our 2019 cohort. This is also a reflection on national level, where the 2020 cohort nationally is very similar in ability profile to the 2019 cohort. Ofqual and the awarding organisations already know nationally what grade distributions to expect in each subject, because we know year on year these don't tend to fluctuate a great deal. And awarding organisations also have detailed understanding of how individual centres have performed, so they can look at the performance relative to previous years to actually look at the probability of the data that we will present. So it'll be very important that we consider this when looking at what grades we assign students. Two final important points to note are that the centre-assessed grade and rank must not be shared with students and parents, and to do so would constitute malpractice, and that the centre-assessed grades will not be used in any way for the appraisal process or the evaluation of a teacher. I'm now going to talk you through Stage 1. This part has already been completed by heads of department, but it's important you understand the methodology that has been used. So the aim of this stage is to produce an overall mark for each student in each subject that is representative of their performance in that subject over the last 2 years. Now, the first part of this stage involves selecting suitable information. When selecting the information that effectively becomes a data set, the following conditions should be satisfied. We want to make sure that the information is available for all students, or at least the vast majority of the cohort taking that subject. We need raw scores as opposed to overall grades. We need the material to have been standardised or moderated in some way to ensure that a fair process has been followed. Access arrangements must have been provided where applicable, and it should have been completed under supervised conditions, or at the very least, teachers can be assured that it is the work of the students. Once these data sets have been established, the next stage is to decide how much weight to give each data set. Each dataset to be used by a subject has been given a weighting. Heads of department have allocated the weighting based on the qualifications breakdown. So for example, if a qualification is made up of 50% exams and 50% NEA, they've generally gone with this. However, they may have adjusted them due to the validity and recency of the dataset. So if, for example, one of the data sets is very old, maybe completed in year 10, they will have possibly given this less weighting than a data set produced in year 11. So we'll look at an example of a data set and weightings. So here you can see we've got 4 data sets. So along the top, we've got the year 10 indicative exam, we've got the year 11 indicative exam, and then we've got 2 NEA sections. What you'll also notice is that each of them have been given a weighting. So the year 10 exam has been given a 10% weighting, the year 11 exam has been given a 30% weighting, and so on. Then underneath that are the results for each data set. So you can see here we've got the raw scores for each of those data sets. And then alongside it, each of them have been ranked individually. So students receive a ranking in each of those data sets. So in other words, who got the highest score will be placed at rank 1, next score down will be rank 2, but you'll notice that the rank is done individually for each data set. The student's ranking in each dataset is then used to calculate a score for that student in the dataset. So again, we'll look at an example of this. So in this table, we can see that we've got data ranks and we've also got a score. Now this score is calculated by starting with 240, so that's the maximum, and then taking away their rank. So 240, take away 6, gives us 234 for this particular student. So the student that was ranked number 1, their calculation would be 240, take away 1, so they'd end up with the highest score of 239. Now the reason 240 has been used is because that's the number of year 11s we have in the cohort. So it was simply chosen as the maximum number we could have. Now what then happens with that score is we calculate the percentage weighting that it's given. So in this case, we know the indicative exam was worth 10%. So the student will get 10% of 234 because that's what that data set is worth. So how do we work out the overall score for the student? Well, we take their data set score and we times it by the percentage. So student 1's overall score would be 10% of 234 because that's what they achieved in data set 1. Then 30% of 222 because data set 2, their score was 222 and it's worth 30%. And you can see with the example with the NEAs, we would need 25% of 233 and 35% of 233. And when these are added together, it gives that student an overall score of 229.2. So in that way, we've taken account of their ranking in each data set, and we've also taken account of the relative weighting we're going to give to each data set. So in this way, we can generate an overall score for each student. I'm sure you'll be happy to know that this calculation has been done for you, or at least your heads of department have spent time over the last 2 weeks calculating this. Now it's important to understand that the absolute value of the mark does not matter, and it's not related to grade boundaries, but the relative value of the mark will be both an initial ranking and, importantly, provides us with a sense of distribution and clustering once grades are applied. So if we look at an example now, so here we've got some ranked scores. So we've got the overall score from highest to lowest. Now we can see that there are 2 students that are clustered at exactly the same overall score. So in making decisions when we apply grades, we would need to ensure that these 2 students got the same grade based on the data sets that we've used. We can also see lower down that there's a clustering of students with very similar overall scores. So again, when we come to apply our grades, we need to consider this because the likelihood is, based on their overall score, they should be getting a very similar, if not the same grade. Now, starting the process by sorting a list of students without objective information is going to be really prone to unconscious bias. To counter this, the approach we have taken ensures that evidence, the data sets, satisfy specific conditions for inclusion. Our information has been uniformly processed. Heads of department have experimented with different weighting models to produce comparability of expected outcomes, and where necessary, they've done further analysis to ensure that all AOs are fairly represented. It's a transparent process and is explicable after the event, so we could explain the process we've used to Ofqual, the awarding bodies, or parents. And finally, the rank can be justified. So overall, we've tried to create a system that is both objective and fair. I'm now going to talk you through Stage 2, the allocation of centre-assessed grades. Half of this has been completed by heads of department this week, but you'll be joining the process next week, so by the end of next week, Stage 2 will be completed. Ofqual guidance states that exam boards, using a model developed with Ofqual, will use a statistical model to standardise grades across centres in each subject. We are working with technical experts within exam boards and others to develop this model, which will combine a range of evidence including expected grade distribution at a national level, results in previous years at individual centre level, and the prior attainment profile of students at a centre level. It then goes on to explain that if the grades that are put forward by centres do not match their expectations or within a tolerance based on an algorithm that they're developing, they will need to adjust them. So we again need to bear this in mind when we're allocating our centre assessed grades. Now, heads of department have already applied 3 grading models to the ranked cohort. But a good question to ask at this point is, why not just ask teachers to provide grades? To do that, I want to go through an example. Here we've got quite a simple data set, where we've got 3 students with 3 results. And you'll note I've gone a bit old school using A to G. The first thing I want you to consider is, what would you give their overall grade? If I now give you this information, it's likely your judgments will change because you've now got raw score data on assessment 2. It might be that actually what you're waiting for is to know what the weighting is for assessment 1, 2 and 3. So if assessment 1 was weighted as 95%, you've pretty much got what the overall grade would be depending on the variation of assessment 2 and 3. But actually, a weighting of 95% on one assessment means that you would tend to go with that overall grade. We also need to consider what we know about the students and how this might unfairly affect our judgments. So for example, if the first student is a good girl, always well behaved and positive in your class, so in other words really enjoys your lessons and they have good attendance, that's going to have a more positive effect than someone that maybe sits with the naughty students in your class, never contributes, though you know they can answer the questions, and generally shows no love of your subject. And again, against someone that always seems to be absent, and therefore their homework isn't completed, and you never really got to know them as an individual. Now, forecasts are really prone to several things. Unconscious bias. They're affected by different methodologies of thought. So in other words, you may think differently when you look at some data as opposed to another class teacher within your department. There can be misinterpretation of the underlying data, and concerns related to performance-related pay or appraisal can bear on some of our minds when we're actually giving those forecast grades. There's also this concept of expected rapid improvement. Those students that actually have been quite lazy or sat at the back, not really doing anything, but deep down you think actually they'll probably get there in the end. All of these really are not based on fact. They're not based on specific reasoning, and we have to be really careful. Extensive research is available which demonstrates teachers are actually most able to accurately rank their students, followed by stating whether they will pass a threshold measure. So for example, whether they were definitely a 4 or above, or a 5 or above, or a 7 or a plus. But they are least successful at predicting the actual grade an individual will achieve. And this pattern is also seen in our school. So this isn't just research data that suggests that this is the national picture but doesn't happen at our school. Analysis of 2019 data, where I compared both Forecast 6 to the GCSE result and Forecast 7, indicates our threshold forecasts are actually broadly in line with the actual outcomes the student achieved. But individual forecasts are generally not. In general, 30% of our forecasts are below the grade the student got, 33% are on, and 33% are above the grade the student actually got. So the reasoning behind this approach of actually first of all awarding grades is to provide teachers with a starting point for contributing to the centre assessed grades, which are not based solely on previous forecasts. So the three grade sets the heads of department have applied are Grading Model 1, and this is to apply our grading distribution that the department achieved in 2019 to our ranked list of students for this year. Grading Model 2 is where we apply the grade distribution based on the ability profile of our current students and looking at the nationally expected outcomes for those prior attainments. So as an example, we would look at how many students we had on 4A and then look at what the expected outcome was for them on a national level and award them that grade. The final model has been completed by the head of department and line manager, and this has been applying a grade distribution that takes account of grading model 1 and 2, but also looks at the clustering of students based on their overall scores and takes into consideration department forecasting for forecast 5 and forecast 6. So the spreadsheet looks something like this, and we've got these three additional columns for grade set 1, 2 and 3. So you're now up to speed with the processes that have been completed over the last 2 weeks. So we're now going to look at the next steps, the work that you and your heads of department are going to be completing as of next Monday, Monday the 18th of May. The first thing will be you'll be having a meeting on Monday, and the head of department will explain the process contextualised for your subject. So you'll learn about the actual data sets that were included and the weightings that have been used and the reasonings behind the selection of those data sets and the weightings. The head of department will also email you a spreadsheet for your class. What you will need to do with this is complete 2 columns. So there's a teacher grade column and a class teacher comment column, and I will need you to add information to these if necessary and then return it to your head of department by Wednesday. So I'm now going to go into a little bit more detail about those 2 columns and what you need to do. So the first thing I need you to do is review the data that has been used. This is an important step as it allows you to understand how your head of department and line manager have arrived at the individual grades in grade set 3. So it's really important you look at the data and understand the methodology used. The next thing I want you to do is reflect on whether you agree with the ranking of the students in the class and the grade estimation for each student in the class looking at grade set 3. So grade set 3 is the important column to look at, and also the ranking of the students within your class. So the spreadsheet at the end will have these 2 columns that will be left blank. You will need to complete those if necessary. So if you agree with the ranking and grading, you leave the teacher grade and the class teacher feedback columns completely blank. So if you agree with the ranking and if you agree with the grade set, no action is needed. If you believe a student's ranking is incorrect, you need to add a comment in the class teacher feedback column. You must also include evidence to support your judgment. So it may be that you believe one student should be above another student, and you can state that, but it's important you give us the evidence that supports that judgment. If you believe a student's grade is too high, so if you think it's too generous, or actually if you think it's too severe, add the grade you would award in the teacher grade column, but again you need to provide the evidence to support this judgment. So each time, if you're suggesting a change is needed, it's absolutely vital you provide the information that will allow us to make that change if necessary. And finally, it is really important that we remember our job is to estimate the most plausible grades our students would have obtained if they had actually taken the exams this summer. We must be objective in doing so. What we have to do is unprecedented. It requires integrity, professional wisdom, courage and ethics. But please remember, we're not doing this on our own. We are going to work as a team to make sure we get this right. At this moment in time, I'd like to thank all the heads of department for their work over the last 2 weeks, because I know it really has been a challenge pulling this all together and getting it to the stage that we're at now. And I'd also like to thank you in anticipation for your work that you'll complete contributing to this process next week. I look forward to seeing you all at some point in the near future. Take care.